Ladies and gentlemen, again, good afternoon. I'm Danny Seabright, the president of US-UAE Business Council. We're going to get started because we have an online audience that was told to be ready to go here at 1:45, and we're a few minutes late. For those watching, we are enjoying a wonderful meal here in the USA Pavilion, compliments of the US government, so we really appreciate the hospitality we're being shown today. I'm going to turn this over to our moderator-in-chief, Noah Rayford, who's the chief futurist at the Dubai Future Foundation. Noah's on my far left. I'm going to quickly introduce Pierre Santoni, president of Parsons, Mohammed Mosaili, leader of the Smart Cities Vertical on Honeywell, Cezanne Maharali, head of public policy, Middle East and Africa at Uber, one of those small companies that sort of is the disruptor in the marketplace. And then Monica Mendez, who's a professor of civil and urban engineering at NYU Abu Dhabi and director of the NYU Abu Dhabi Research Center for Interacting Urban Networks, Cities. So to lead the conversation, I'm going to turn it over to Noah, and I think it's going to be quite fascinating. Noah's one of the smartest, most future-thinking folks I've ever worked with in my life, so he's going to draw out some thoughts, some great thoughts on American innovation from our crowd here and the panelists. Noah, over to you. Thank you, Daniel.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks. It's lovely to see some familiar faces and old friends like Danny and meet some new faces and friends as well. It's a pleasure to be here and to welcome such a distinguished panel. As Danny mentioned, this topic of conversation is going to focus primarily on innovation around urban development, urban systems management, transportation, mobility, energy security, and the role that digital and other technologies play in that. And my name is Noah Rayford. I'm the futurist in chief and the chief of global affairs for an organization run by the Dubai government called the Dubai Future Foundation. And we have the privilege of exploring these questions every day, thinking what are the primary challenges and opportunities that the next 20, 30, 50 years will bring to Dubai and to the UAE, and what can we do with our partners to start to prototype solutions and opportunities today in Dubai. And a lot of that is using the city as a test bed. This gets into energy, this gets into transport, this gets into digital management systems, education, healthcare. And so Dubai is a very interesting place to be exploring this question about the city of the future and the issues and opportunities of the future. And I would like to kick off the conversation with Monica first. You're a professor of transportation, transport planning. This is another reason that it's interesting to have this conversation in Dubai, because as many of you are aware, about 2/3 of the world population is within an 8-hour flight of Dubai. And the conditions that many people in these cities live in are very rapid urban growth, often quite challenging infrastructure provisions, often within the coastal environments and subject to flooding, climate change, et cetera, often lacking access to fundamental basic services. As we look forward into both the challenges and the opportunities of the cities of the future, how do you see the transportation planning and indeed urban management as a whole operating to help people live better lives in this environment moving forward?
Thank you. And thank you, Noah, for the first question. And thank you first to, also to the organizers for inviting me here. Hi, everyone. So before I go into transportation, I recently had a very lively conversation with some colleagues at the university, and we were talking about the future and how our different disciplines, we're all civil engineers, but how our different disciplines were impacting that future. And one of the colleagues does materials, construction materials, and he was like, we are the ones designing the future because, we're creating these energy efficient, green materials that provide some sort of insulation in extreme weather conditions, and they're also more sustainable in the production process. And my husband does construction management, and his point was, I'm sorry, but it's all about how we're building things. He does 3D printing, so he was an advocate for 3D printing in construction, and the robotization of some of the construction process. I'm a believer that transportation actually is the most important thing. I'm sorry for the other people. Transportation is the backbone to a city, right? Without mobility, we don't have cities, right? We need mobility for economic prosperity. So when we think about transportation, we need to start thinking about new modes, the electrification of transportation, on-demand transportation, shared services, digitization of transportation, automation, driverless cars, and there's probably, hopefully there's gonna be time to talk about that. Integrated solutions, so the idea of mobility as a service. But again, as I said at the beginning, new modes of transportation. We have a Hyperloop at some point or something completely different from that. In any case, I just think that even if we take this disciplinary approach, it's very hard to put or to imagine a mold for the future cities, right? What we like the most when we travel to different cities is to see the unique features of those cities. So I really hope those unique features are retained somehow. At the same time, most cities, it doesn't matter how different they look like or how different they operate, most of them are trying to be more connected. That means with the different components talking to each other in the city, smarter. So based on that communication between components, you can make more intelligent decisions and then more resilient so that those decisions are not myopic, but they make sense also in the long term. So they're sustainable in the long term. Hence the whole buzz about smart cities. And I'm talking a little about cities in general outside transportation because we have a huge effort looking at cities at NYU Abu Dhabi. We have a research center that looks at cities from many different perspectives. And so I think this buzz about smart cities is partly justified. If you look at it, it's mostly about instrumentation, a lot of sensors everywhere for everything. I personally think it should be more about information and the way we use that instrumentation. I actually think it's a balance. It should be a balance between technology and information, and not deploying technology for the sake of technology, but ultimately to improve the quality and sustainability of our everyday lives, right? So that should be our goal with the next transportation systems, with the next construction materials, with the next construction processes, etc. Just improving the quality of life in cities.
That's fantastic. I'm going to ask a question for each of the panelists, and then I want to get a conversation going. Monica, you mentioned 3D printing, which is a subject near and dear to my heart. Probably 5 years ago or so, I had the privilege of building the world's first and to date only fully functional 3D printed building. It's got just won a Guinness Book of World Records last year. In front of Emirates Towers, I urge you all to come check it out. I'm going to pass over to Pierre. Pierre, you know a thing or two about infrastructure and construction. Could you just introduce yourself briefly and then start to explore how technologies like 3D printing and digitization and instrumentation might play out in the work that you're doing for some of the clients you're working on?
Thanks, Noah. So thanks, Monica. Thank you, Danny, and the entire team for inviting us. It's a great opportunity to talk about these topics that are dear to our heart and, in front of the audience. So 3D printing, it's quite interesting. When I saw the question, I was thinking a couple of years ago, I attended a conference in the US where a scientist was explaining how he was designing a building as an integrated energy solution, where the building would extract energy from the air, from the sun, from the earth, store it in its own structure, and then through a very complex and intelligent thermal exchange system, transfer that energy into power for the building, for its use, and to the car for all of the needs. And that would be an entirely 3D printed building, an entirely 3D printed car, completely off the grid if you want it to be. So this is the kind of disruption I think about when I think about 3D building, 3D printing, sorry. And, that's obviously a vision of the future where we're not there yet. I think we're quite far from that, although I understand that prototype is operating somewhere and they're working on it. But I'd like to think that we could, rein this back a little bit and think about how 3D printing helps us to develop more efficient buildings that are easier to build, that are safer to build as well, less reliant on human labor, that are also less obviously obtrusive for the environment. And all of that is something that we at Parsons, we incorporate in our design, in our thought process. We don't design buildings per se very much at Parsons. We design everything around them. We conceive everything around them, but we like to work on advanced solutions in as much as we can with those, so that we can incorporate that and lead the development of, as I said, all the infrastructure around it, because that's primarily what we do.
That's fascinating. Can I ask you to elaborate a little bit more on that? And Monica mentioned that a lot of smart cities work is primarily instrumentation and data collection and management. And when we built the 3D printed building, really, if you think about 3D printed construction, let's just not say buildings, it's really just the pointy end of the digitization spectrum, from BIM to sensors, instrumentation to planning and systems in advance. So I have a feeling you have experience in that whole spectrum of digitization and how that's impacted. Could you just tell a story or two how recent developments or maybe what prototypes you're working on has helped you improve the kinds of projects that you're running and the kinds of projects that you're delivering?
Well, first, as I said, it's working with our industry partners to be able to harness technology. We like to think of ourselves as solution providers. So our aim is not necessarily to provide a solution that is as I like to say, a square peg for a round hole. We like to design solutions that are the best for our clients. So when we do that, we incorporate technology that comes from all possible sources, as long as it is the right technology for that particular client, for that particular mission. So we're not necessarily constrained by solutions that we develop ourselves, but we're the integrator of all solutions, of all technology, in order to provide the right solution for our clients.
Fantastic. Well, that's a perfect,
communities.
And communities. That's a perfect segue to Mohammed. Mohammed, please introduce yourself. You run Honeywell's Smart Cities team.
Yeah, actually, I lead the smart cities and smart communities business in Honeywell. So I'm very close to the technology kind of field, but I agree with Monica. It's not about technology. So actually, it's people and process first. So we see what people need and start from there and analyze the entire thing, understand the use cases, then draw the processes that you need to implement in front of you, then choose the technology. So technology comes as the last point of the chain that we have to work on. But I have a few examples also to say, and I think since we are in the lovely city of Dubai, which is promoted as one of the smart cities across the globe, there is the Dubai Digital Authority, which takes care of the strategy for how the digitization of services goes into Dubai. And again, the task that they took initially is to make Dubai as the happiest city in the world, or on earth. This is the right word. So starting again from people, enhancing the entire experience behind it, making it very seamless experience for them, personalized as well, and taking that back to the technology. And when they analyzed what they need, they identified 3 different areas that they need to invest in, as well as make more of a standardized prototypes and models to implement it. But starting from the blockchain technology, which we will talk about it a little bit, and then focusing on artificial intelligence, which is a very, very emerging technology as well. Then the data science part of it, the big data and all the technologies behind it, and we built strategy for each one of those. One use case that really made a strong impact is using blockchain, which for people that are not familiar with it, it's more around enhancing the transactional type of processes. They have actually made the paperless, so the city concept for paperless across the entire UAE or Dubai government entities. And by end of this year, we will announce that Dubai is 100% digitized. No more papers required for any transaction, which will take us to what they have made as an impact is basically 5.5 billion dirhams of savings out of this initiative alone. So for people asking about return on investments and things like that, I think this is very well answered. Other aspect is not only to invest in technologies, but to take it further and build the community behind the technology between private and public sector in the UAE, then take it up to the international level and making Dubai as the city of the future for the international community, and trying to invite companies and customers, cities, investors from all over the globe to come here in Dubai and make this impactful investment in technology and use it as a test bed, get the outcomes out of it, and then spread it all over the world and implement it. So I think it's a pretty much strong story here that we have, and it's a good start to take the technology further to other areas.
I have a huge smile on my face because back in 2014 or so, we started the first blockchain work in Dubai, back when it was, I don't want to say illegal, because it wasn't technically against the law, but it was definitely pre-legal. And we created, to your point about community, something called the Global Blockchain Council, which again was at the time the world's largest multi-stakeholder organization exploring blockchain technology that had the banks, major multinationals, local startups, all of the regulators. And out of that, a series of pilot projects emerged, and the industry came back to us and said, where's this all going? And we, with Smart Dubai, wrote the Dubai Blockchain Strategy, which originally committed to having 100% of all government transactions on a blockchain by 2020. But as we then embarked on trying to achieve that goal, we realized that not everything actually has to be on a blockchain. It's a nice aspirational vision, and that did all of the regulatory work to enable cryptocurrencies and blockchain technologies and municipal use cases. But through that work with partners such as yourself, we realized there's a lot more intelligent solutions that don't need a blockchain, and that became the paperless strategy. And one little funny historical anecdote, you know, I got all these gray hairs from trench warfare and in Emirates Towers, was part of the way we sold that to His Highness Sheikh Mohammed was on estimating the annual economic impact of that. And they had a picture of the Burj Khalifa, and our estimate was you'd save about 5.5 billion dirhams a year, which is more or less the equivalent of one Burj Khalifa worth of value every year. And so it makes my heart sing to hear that now, 5-6 years down the road, we weren't entirely inaccurate with that number. And indeed, while as a Dubai government employee, it's a little bit annoying not to be able to print anything out, like my lecture notes for today, for example, it nonetheless is something which has been a massive achievement. And so I think that's a fantastic example. Thank you.
I would like actually to thank you personally for that, because as a resident of Dubai, I'm actually enjoying such services. And I'm using the Dubai Now app as an example to do all my transactions throughout the Dubai government authorities, even private companies as well, which is a great achievement, because it really saves a lot of time and efforts and makes it very easy to track all your transactions, which in the past, it was a nightmare. Wow. You imagine how many agencies we have to deal with every day. So it's really a big impact. So,
well, I think we should just end the panel there. That's a great story. No, I'm kidding. That's great. Thank you. These are some fantastic examples. Let's move to mobility in particular. So we've covered sort of transportation, infrastructure, a bit of digitization and smart cities. Pierre, could you elaborate a little bit more before we move on to Cezanne about some of the micro-mobility solutions? How do you see the future of mobility playing out in the context of the digital world?
So I think we need to look at two different horizons. I think if we look at today and the near term, we need to think about how we can improve things, build back better, build things that are safer, more resilient, more sustainable, more accessible. So very much like what Monica was talking about, the backbone of a city for us is a transportation system. Transportation system needs to be accessible to all, it needs to be multimodal, it needs to promote mode shift from individual cars to public transport to shared mobility solutions, whether they're micro, macro, whether it's Uber or an electric moped on the sidewalk. But all of that needs to be part of the way, needs to be central in the way we think in order for us to deliver those solutions. And I talked about solutions earlier. And for us, I mean, I heard Mohammed say very wisely, it's not about technology for the sake of technology. And Monica said the same thing. We need to develop the demand side of think about the demand side of the equation. The demand side is us, it's people. We're designing for people, we're developing cities for people. So cities are only as good as what they could provide to the people who live in them. So in that respect, when we look at our solutions, I mean, we've got a few that you know we've developed in-house. We have a very strong R&D. We've got a smart solutions lab here in the Middle East. We work with our colleagues in North America quite a lot. We have a solution called iNet, which is the world's most deployed intelligent transportation system, which enables us, it's really a smart city platform actually, which enables us to bolt in all the components that are transportation system. We have micromobility, we have shared mobility, we have its intelligent intersections, all of that is encompassed in that particular model and that particular platform. So all of these solutions, I think, will enable us, if we really think of those shared, those core principles of sustainability, safety, and accessibility, to develop solutions that then will help us improve the cities we live in. Then if we look at the future a little bit further out, and that's your job, Noah, is really what will the city look like in a few years, in 20 years from now? And then we'd like to think that, we'd like to work with entities like yours, educational institutions and industry partners to apply our thought process and the lessons we've learned today to help guide the development of these cities. And a city in the future may not be a city at all. It may just be a lot more dispersed than it is today, especially if we look at, hypermobility solutions such as Hyperloop and others that would enable us to, work in New York while living in San Francisco, for example, and things of the such. But that's very far in the future, I think, for now. But a lot of people like yourself, and congratulations for that, are thinking about this. So we'd love to be involved in that as well and help foster those thoughts.
Fantastic. I mean, we're showcasing some of America's most innovative companies here, and just around the corner from us in the DP World Pavilion, there is Virgin Hyperloop One, which is, one of the, I would say, most advanced Hyperloop systems in the world. Obviously, not deployed in an operational system yet, but I'm starting to sound a little bit like a broken record. But I have a feeling there's a reason Danny picked me for this panel. We're very privileged, thanks to Danny's help and some of our other colleagues, to bring Hyperloop to the UAE as part of our acceleration program and facilitate the relationship with RTA, which led to the investment from DP World and from Virgin. So if you want to see what that future might look like after the official program finishes, go around the corner to DP World and check out the Hyperloop example. But Hyperloop is just one vision of future mobility. We have a living example of future mobility here in the form of Cezanne. I should say the company that Cezanne works with. How old is Uber now? 15 years or so? 10 years?
Yeah, not even. I think the company started in 2010. So yeah, like we're going on 12 years now, like very, very young.
That's amazing. I mean, and perhaps Uber and sort of ride sharing apps as part of the gig economy as a whole represents one of the most, I would say, rapid and impactful deployments of technology in an urban context. Maybe of anything I can think of. I mean, it's not quite as significant as penicillin or the sewage system, but it's made a big impact. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how Uber sees the sort of future of mobility and what you're doing about it today, particularly maybe in this part of the world or in your main focus areas?
Yeah, thank you so much, Noah, and thank you, Danny, for having me here. I think technology today is just so prevalent in every single part of our lives. Favorite question to ask at the beginning of a panel: who took an Uber to get here? Hands up. When we look at our vision for the future and for technology, and originally when Uber was first invented all those 12 years ago, the original intention was just, hey, like, is there an easier way to hail a car? And today, not only on the app can you get a car, you can get a bike, you can get a scooter, you can get an electric car. We're connected with transit around the world. We've also got Uber Eats, you've got delivery, Uber Chopper here in Dubai. Yes, exactly. And ultimately just using a single app in your pocket, you can go anywhere and you can get anything. And when we look at the transport side of things in particular, and we look at our vision around transportation, and I really echo a lot of the sentiments that have been shared here today, we look at a future in transport that is shared, that is electric, that is multimodal, and that is inclusive. Particularly on the sharing aspect of it, one of the things that we look at very closely is just how people are using private cars today. And interestingly, what we've also seen since the pandemic and people just being so much more nervous about sharing transportation, there's been a massive increase in the level of private car usage around the world, which is actually a very scary thing because it's almost exactly the opposite of what we want to achieve. We look at, in ride hailing, we look at private cars almost as like the nemesis of ride hailing, right? Like it's all really about shared mobility. When you look at even just the usage of a private car, some people don't realize this, but you only really use your car like 4 or 5% of the time. You drive to work, it's parked, stays there the whole day. You drive home, it's parked while you're sleeping. You have like 25-30% of cities that are just dedicated to parking. Like our cities are just parking lots and they're just built around cars and not people, which is what they really should be. And so even just getting people to share a ride and not having to park already saves so much in terms of like infrastructure for cities, so that you can really focus on those usage of those areas and turn them into green spaces, into theaters, into like having the stuff that community really loves. The second piece is around just electric. We've talked a lot, you know, about, we've already started the conversation today around sustainability. And we believe that ride hailing can have a massive impact in kickstarting a lot of the sustainability initiatives around the region. Already today in Dubai, you can hail, you can get an Uber Green. We're looking to see how we can expand the electric vehicles even further. We're really looking, and we're noticing how many of the countries in the region are making sustainability commitments, and we want to be a part of that story, because I think that in the Middle East especially, we have such an opportunity here. So many of the cities, especially here in Dubai, for instance, newly designed, we have the luxury of having like almost way better infrastructure than we do in other parts of the world. Even today, the proportion of EV kilometers that we do on the ride-hailing platform with the limited Uber Green that we have is more than we see in some of the European cities. So I think there's a real opportunity here for us to accelerate that. And Uber as a company has made a global commitment to go net zero by 2040. And so, thank you. So, this region is certainly like, a place where we have our eye on the prize. And then finally, just, around the multimodal side of things, we want to be in a world where you can open your app and you have available a whole host of different ways to be able to get from point A to point B. So you open your app, it'll tell you walk from here to there, you'll pick up your bike, you'll get to the tram, you'll take the tram, your Uber will be waiting for you on the other side, and everything should be seamless, everything should be easy so people can get around in the most cost-effective and fastest way possible, so that we can just move around our cities in a much easier and better way.
That's fascinating vision. Could I ask a little bit, where does autonomy fit into that? I mean, Uber was an early mover in the electric or the autonomous vehicle space. You bought more or less all of Carnegie Mellon's roboticists. And then historically, I've chosen to focus back on core business now. Is there still a role for autonomy in the long-term vision of sort of micromobility and shared services in your eyes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in the early days, Uber took a very big bet on the autonomous vehicles, and the premise of it being really around the whole story around electric, around safety. And I think also, like, when the pandemic hit, fundamentally, we just had to refocus on the core business, which is why we ended up hiving off our autonomous vehicle section, but we still own like about 26% in the company that we sold it to. So I think autonomous definitely has a big role to play in the future. We've definitely got our eyes on it, but I think Uber as a company for now is just focusing very much on the core business and making sure we can get that right. But, certainly it's becoming a very big part of the conversation everywhere you go.
Makes total sense. On the matter of fundamentals, let me turn back to Monica. As we speak, we have various world leaders on their way or in Glasgow now around COP. We had the headlines this morning of, depending on how you read it, a relatively disappointing degree of commitment from various world leaders to climate targets. We'll see how Glasgow sorts out, but one of the things that we're often asked in the foundation is, what do we think the biggest issues in the future are going to be? And of course, it should be a no-brainer at this point that it is ultimately dealing with the potential, maybe the inevitability of large-scale climate collapse and mass migration and all of the human toll that will take. But cities is where this is being felt now, and this is where this will be felt increasingly. As we talk about the fundamentals of the cities of the future, it has to take into account sustainability, both from a damage reduction, risk mitigation perspective, but also from as a source of solutions as well. Could you share some thoughts on what you think the most exciting opportunities are as we deal with this coming catastrophe?
Quite unfortunately, transportation is one of the largest pollutants in cities across the world. So it is imperative that we start thinking about transportation in a cleaner manner. And Suzanne mentioned electrification. So electrification is certainly the first step, right? Now we need to be careful with electrification because electric cars are only as good as the energy sources that are used to generate the electricity, right? So in places that are using very dirty energy sources like coal, they might be better off for now with traditional fuel engine vehicles. The hope is that those dirty sources of electricity will go away and then electrification could take over around the world. Now, when we talk about electrification, the default is to think about our private cars. And that's true, it's good because there are a lot of private cars around. But we need to be thinking also about the electrification of the public transportation system, right? The other day I read that only about 16% of buses worldwide are electric. So that means that we have a huge way to go. And then when you think about a public transport system, it's not only buses. I also read recently that Norway is trying to electrify ferries. Right, so we need to think about electrification of the whole vehicle fleet and the different modes. Now, this has been said before, but I will repeat it. Even if we were to electrify all our cars, we cannot continue thinking that our private car is the only way to get there fast, conveniently, comfortably, right? There's a whole suite of solutions that we need to start exploring. And I mentioned public transportation, which is certainly way more efficient than cars. And because it moves way more people with a smaller environmental and spatial footprint. And one of the great things that Uber has done is sort of blur the line between private transportation and public transportation. Taking away the idea that we need to rely on our own cars to actually get there conveniently, right? So, but then it's not only public transportation. There are many cities that are now investing into new infrastructure or creating incentives to promote walking and biking, two of the oldest, the oldest modes of transportation, right? Not because they're only good for the environment, but they're also good for our health, right? And then we need to harness new technologies to create new modes of transportation that are sustainable. What Suzanne was saying and Pierre was also saying about creating a seamless experience that allows you to use different modes so you don't rely uniquely on your car. That's probably the future, right? The future for the next 20 years. Now, what we have seen with the pandemic, we have seen this fear of public transportation or mass transportation, which is very unfortunate because cities were starting to understand the value of it. But we have also seen our changes in mobility. And we realized that we don't need to go everywhere all the time to work, to get education, to be happy, right? We have drastically changed our mobility patterns. And in many cities across the world, you can now see mountains that you couldn't see before just because there's much less pollution. So the question is, will any of that remain after the pandemic goes away, which will hopefully happen at some point? Can we learn out of that? Can we change our mobility patterns in a way that is sustainable?
You asking me to answer that? Let me bounce that back to the panel. Actually, I have one last question that I want to ask to each of you in sequence before. Do we have time for questions before, Danny?
Yeah, we have about 10 more minutes, maybe a question or two from the audience.
Perfect. So just on that, I just want to get a closing thought. That was a big question to end on. So if you could let's do this in sequence, Pierre, starting with you. Do you think that we will, and by we, capital W, we as cities, as civilization, be able to adapt to the changes necessary to deal with this energy transition? And second part of the question, what are the kind of big, wild, crazy ideas that you're most excited about that might facilitate that transformation?
So we have no choice, I think. We have to adapt, and as civilization has shown us, we as a species, we're very good at adapting. That's why we're the dominant species on this planet. So we need to adapt, and we will. Now, how we do it is the big question. That's what we've been talking about, right? So I think we're, all the ideas that we discussed today, some of them are already under implementation, some of them are still in the ideation phase, will help us get there. I think we're facing tremendous challenges. We're facing tremendous strain for our cities, but tremendous threats as well. One thing we didn't talk about is cybersecurity and how we need to protect our critical infrastructure, because we've seen a tremendous increase in attacks specifically intended to harm and to destruct rather than to extract money out of infrastructure. So it's something that's very, very close to what we do here at Parsons. And, we've been working on this for many, many years. We've moved away, for example, very briefly, if I can say, from building the biggest firewall we could possibly think of to thinking that, well, eventually the hackers will come in. So we need to design an environment in which we can still continue to operate while the hackers are moving around our systems. That's a completely different way of thinking. So, this is, as I said, we have no choice but to adjust to those threats. Environmental change is one of them. And I'm confident that we will do it. Now, if I think of the future, and I don't want to take too much time because the other panelists need to talk, but you think about what are the biggest ideas. What's exciting about the future for me, it may sound surprising, is that we don't know what's going to happen. That's the most exciting part, is that we get to make it happen. We get to work with very talented, very, very smart people and forward-thinking people like the ones on this panel and the teams we have behind us and all the people in the audience to think what the future is going to be like, to work on it. And I feel very fortunate I work for a company that can be on the forefront of that and enable us to then implement those solutions when we find them. So that's really what's exciting for me.
That's a very inspiring and exciting response. Mohammed, what are you most excited about in the future, and how might we be able to successfully navigate this transition ahead of us?
Absolutely. There's two ideas. The one is the urban air mobility. This is one area I'm personally excited about it, and in Honeywell, we invest a lot also in this part. I can see it coming very soon, especially for the part related to logistics, smart logistics and freight and things like that. But for moving people entirely, it's still difficult. We're facing a lot of operational challenges and a lot of legislations and a lot of different things that we need to sort out, but it's coming, and it's the most exciting in transportation as well. On the other aspect, personal matter as well. I just recently did surgery, and I was thinking at that time about robotics and robots doing the surgery remotely, and it was like, it's possible. I know it's in prototype case in different countries, but either I will be able to accept it, and because I was lying there and I was looking, and it's a major operation room and many doctors around me, and it was like, oh my God. But think about nobody, but it's just a small robot who's doing everything. I think I'm personally excited about this one, and I think it will make big impact.
Yeah, that's what anesthesia is for. Thank you. Suzanne, how about yourself? What are you most excited about for the future?
So I think we just can't ignore this question about sustainability. I think it's so important. And I think that mindset change is just fundamental, and it has to start with every single individual. So the next time I have the opportunity to be up here and I ask who took an Uber to get here, everyone is going to raise their hands.
Hey, Monica, please.
Well, before talking about the future, let's talk a little bit about the past in transportation. For the last century or so, our most beloved form of transportation is our private cars, right? And they have evolved. They're now faster, safer, probably cleaner, more comfortable. But ultimately, the basics remain the same. It's a box in 4 wheels that drive through a channel, which we call road. So now there's a lot of buzz about autonomous vehicles, and they hold great potential. They're going to change our future. Yet if you think about it, they continue to be a box in 4 wheels that moves along a channel, right? The only difference is that rather than having a person at the steering wheel, you'll have a computer. So the question for us here is, will we see in our lifetime an actual change in the transportation systems? And I think urban air mobility is one of those potential changes. I fully agree with you, Mohammed. Or is it the Hyperloop? Or is it a pod that creates this sort of seamless transportation or seamless trip that, can be part of a bus or a plane or a boat or a train. So that allows you a transfer-less trip. What exactly is the future? I know that's not an idea, it's a call for ideas, but I think it's equally important when we think about the futures, because what Pierre said, we don't know what's going to happen.
Absolutely. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Great. Please, sir, up front. Do we have a mic in the audience?
Good afternoon. My name is Anand. I work for a company called Smart Energy Water, US-based company. One comment and a question. So maybe instead of asking who took an Uber today, can we ask who took a Expo hopper today? It's much more sustainable. It's a bus. It's free, and it's more sustainable, right? Question to you, not to the panel, sorry, but to you. Sorry. I'm always impressed by the big ideas that Dubai Future Foundation works with. Do you also have an entity that is standing next to you and saying, while we work on these futuristic projects, there is also the existing technology that we can leverage for something that we can do today? Right? So is there like 2 entities, maybe they are like digital twins connected at the hip? Because there is a lot of things, small things that can help grassroots level sustainable initiatives, right? I mean,
there is an entity, and it's called the rest of the Dubai government. And I say that jokingly, but the reality is we have the privilege of not having to keep the lights on and keep the roads clear and keep the streets safe. And that is the function that we play, is to help our partners in Dubai government and the executive council to think about the things they don't have time as often to think about. So we work very closely with all of the different state-owned companies and main regulators, both at the federal and the emirate level, to implement those things. And we support those through various programs, like an accelerator. We have a robotics lab where we develop prototypes and develop PPPs around warehouse logistics and all sorts of cleaning things. So I'll just leave it there and say yes. If you have ideas of that nature, get in touch with us and we'll try and channel those in the right way. Particularly though, because our job is not to do incremental improvement. Our job is to facilitate radical transformation, which is kind of necessary for these huge leaps forward into the future to be enabled, and in particular in regulated sectors. Right. So this goes for all of you. If you're working in a regulated industry, then you need a sovereign partner and you have a technology or a solution such as those discussed today, then get in touch with us and we might be able to help you develop these things. And that's for everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe a question for the panel now. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Alyssa and I'm actually with the USA Pavilion. So me and Bob were just talking about how security in the US in our cities looks so much different than security here in Dubai, and how that was really shocking for both of us when we came here. In these like smart cities of the future, what are some of the ways that security is going to be maybe like enforced and maintained, especially when we have things like more public transportation, more use of online like currency exchanges and information exchanges, and maybe like what is Dubai doing now that we can learn in the rest of the world?
Do you mean the Dubai police are better looking? Let me hand that over to the panel. We answer cybersecurity. Maybe Pierre and Mohammed, do you want to address this? But also, please, Susanna.
Both of us. I mean, I talked about cybersecurity, and obviously, if you think of that becoming omnipresent, in when you take a bus, when you interact, when you go anywhere, you will be subject to. You will be filmed. You will be photographed. Your data, your personal biodata will be analyzed in a computer. That computer will be able to extract information from a database to say whether or not you're, a positive actor or a negative actor. That is totally unobtrusive if you think about it. It can be, and it should be totally unobtrusive. So you protect that way, but you also, as I talked about, make sure that you don't allow adverse forces to impact the way the system that you're going to use is operating, because it will create disruption. Disruption will create health issues, which will create safety issues, which will create all sorts of negative effect, cause all sorts of negative effects. So all of this is a whole. I think we can make it happen. In a lot of ways, what gets in the way of that holistically is the fact that infrastructure is largely privately owned. Maybe not necessarily here, but if you look at the US, about 85%. If you look at other parts of the world, the majority of infrastructure is privately owned. So you have governments that set regulations, you have entities that define the framework that we operate within, and then you have private entities that are supposed to implement security, but that don't because they don't have really an incentive to do so. So we need strong regulations, I think, and oversight to be able to implement those solutions.
Yeah, I think Pierre already answered it, but there is one, it's a good answer, but there is another part in the past few years. We will always saying there's a physical security and there's cyber security or information security or anything you like to call it. Nowadays, we don't talk that language anymore. It's actually coming all together. Critical infrastructure protection would be the right, CIP would be the right term that defines both actually, and coming together because physical security required cyber security as well. It's again, a lot of information that is going there. And security is number one vertical in any smart city implementation. So that's across this entire region, may not be the same for all regions, but this region, every and each customer, we go on to talk about smart city, they say, number one, do safe city, and then we do everything else. So it is a kind of, I would say, big focus. It is also difficult to implement because it requires massive infrastructure. And we're talking here about video streams all over the place, which is the most difficult to manage in terms of size and processing and all these kind of, I would say, processes or I would say, what is the right word? Let's stay with processes at the moment or analytics that would be required in the background in order to get really some insights out of this and use it the right way and stay away from the bad guys, which they are almost all over the place. And as Pierre said, moving from protecting our infrastructure from the bad guys to dealing with them while they are already moving around within the infrastructure is a big shift in thinking. So it's no longer, I will close the door, and if you're able to pass through it, you have access to everything, and you can destroy everything. No, it's basically, during the way, you will have a lot of roadblocks that you have to cross, and a lot of intelligent part of our network and softwares looking for you and waiting for you to deal with. So it's really a big shift in the way how we think about it and the way how we implement it as well.
Thank you all. I wish we had time for more questions. So please join me in a round of applause for this extraordinary group of people.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give you all a chance to network with the group. We're going to take a group picture really quickly with Bob there and myself on this end. But I just want to say thank you to the U.S. government, the USA Pavilion, for all of this wonderful support and hospitality. We have a couple people in the room that we haven't recognized and should be recognized, because if you want to get in touch with key U.S. companies, Bruce Ellsworth, who's our commercial counselor here in Dubai, thank you.